Morning everybody. I'm going to be showing you how to make some hot cross buns today, and I will be telling you about some variations, but I actually did this entire video yesterday and I didn't check my yeast. So because it's very easy for yeast to go off, especially once it's past its sell by date now, or open. And I had big pots of yeast, so I didn't check it yesterday, and my hot cross buns didn't rise. So I'm very upset with myself because I wasted all the ingredients. So I thought today that I would show you first how we make yeast bloom to check that it is still live and working. So we have done it in our yeast experiments, if you remember back to those, but I'm going to show you today how to do it anyway. Now I've heated up my milk, but it's still a little bit too hot and I don't want to kill my yeast. So I'm going to put a little bit of cold milk in first, and I'm going to put in, well, this is half a tablespoon of sugar, and then I'm going to add some of the warm milk to my yeast mixture. And what we're trying to achieve, if you think back or try and remember back to our yeast investigations, is that we're trying to make it lukewarm. We're trying to make it body temperature, because that is the temperature that yeast thrives at. And then I'm just going to give it a little stir, just so that I'm incorporating that yeast into the liquid. And then I'm going to leave it for about 5-10 minutes, and I will show you what that looks like if the yeast is alive. If it's not alive, then the reaction is not going to occur, and then I know I have to start off with some new yeast. So I'll come back and show you what that looks like. Alright, so I've left that for 10 minutes now, and you can see that that yeast is working, alright, because we have got a lovely foamy bit on the top. And guys, if you remember back to the practical that we did on yeast, that is the whole object of yeast. It is a biological raising agent, and when the yeast grows, it forms little bubbles. It forms bubbles of CO2, and the other byproduct is ethanol, which is alcohol, but when you bake the bread, that gets burnt off. But the little CO2 makes all the bubbles that gives the bread its rise. So I know that my yeast is working, so I'm going to get ready and finish up making the dough. Right, I will attach the recipe to the description box below, but as you can see, I have got all my ingredients and my equipment on the plate over there, and I've got everything ready to go, so that I'm ready and I don't have to look for things when I'm making. So I've got 500 grams of strong bread flour in here. Now I use a metal spoon just because I find it easier in the beginning, and then I start to use my hands, and I'll show you when we get to that stage. But we are going to add the salt to the dough, and we're going to add the sugar. Right now at this stage, if you are using yeast, you would add your yeast, but remember I've bloomed mine. So I'm going to add my yeast with my liquid. Right, so I've got all that in, and I'm just going to give that a little stir. Oh. Try and keep the flour in the bowl. Right, going to make a little well in the center. Oh, no, not yet. Right, so some recipes will tell you to add the spices later, but I like to add it in now because I find that it distributes them more evenly throughout the mix. So I've got some cinnamon here. Now, once again, hot cross buns in South Africa tend to have a lot more spices than the ones here, and it was one of the things that I found strange when I first had hot cross buns in the UK. Ours are very much more spiced than yours, so I add cinnamon, but I've also got some nutmeg here, and I've got some ginger, and I add those as well to my hot cross buns. And it depends who I'm making it for. If I'm making it for my sons, then I will just use half a teaspoon of each. But if I'm making it for my husband and I actually add double that because we like them really spicy. So again, I'm going to give that a good mix around so that all the spices are distributed. And then I'm going to make a little hole in the center. And I'm going to put in my yeast. Now I'm going to make sure that I get all my yeast out. Because that is one of the most important thing, well, the only thing that's going to cause the rise in my buns. So I'm just going to make sure that I get all of that in. And then I have got some warm milk here. The recipe tells you to warm it up. And I've just melted the butter. Now we are making an enriched dough. And an enriched dough, normally if we were making pizza or something like that, which you guys should have made already, is just water and the flour and the yeast and salt. And that brings your pizza dough together. But because we're making an enriched dough, one that is softer, we are using eggs, we are using butter, and the eggs and the butter will break some of the gluten strands and make them softer, hence a softer bun rather than a pizza, which is must be a much stronger structure. So I've melted the butter into the milk. Now I have got whole milk here, but you could just use semi-skimmed milk, is absolutely fine. It's not a problem. I have got a little bit more than I, just purely because I added some cream to mine, but I'm going to leave a little bit back. I'm not going to use it all at this stage because although you want a nice soft dough, you need to just make sure that you don't use too much, right, that it's not too sticky. So I've left a little bit back. Now when we start this, I always start it with a spoon or a knife, because if you get your fingers into the liquid, everything will then stick to your fingers. It will eventually come off, but I find it's easier to start off with a spoon just until you get to this stage. Now we want quite a sticky dough for this one, and I often say this, you don't want it so sticky that you can't do anything with it and you can't knead the dough, but you don't want it too dry. And it's a difficult one to get right. It's to actually get to that point where it's not too sticky and it's not too wet. And that is when your fingers are the best tool ever, because you can feel then how wet and how sticky your dough is compared, and when you're using a spoon, you just don't feel that difference in texture. Now, this is not a sticky dough yet, really. It's not, it's soft, but it's not sticky. So I'm going to add just another sort of tablespoon, and I'm going to add it down the side, right? And then I'm going to use the bulk of this, and I'm going to mix it in, right? Now that is a sticky dough, and I'm going to knead it a little inside the bowl. And you'll find, guys, you saw how sticky it was in the beginning, but the more you knead it, the less sticky it will become, and it'll happen very quickly. Now, our main objective for now is to knead it until you develop the gluten strands. Now again, I think I've explained this in the pizza one. You're trying to develop and layer the gluten strands, which is the sticky stuff, the sticky protein. And it's going to stick to your hand for a while because your hand is wet, but I promise you it will become less sticky. Don't be tempted at this stage to add flour. Only if you really have added too much liquid and you can't bring it all together would I advise some flour. But I'm going to carry on kneading, and I'm going to knead in the bowl for now because it's very, very sticky. But once I've kneaded it in here for about 2 or 3 minutes, I should be able to transfer it on my counter, and then I'll show you what that looks like. Right, I've just kneaded that for a few minutes, and you can see it's come to a ball, but it's still sticky. So don't wash that because we're going to use the bowl now for proving the dough. So now I'm going to knead on my counter, and I'm going to show you the technique for that. I'm just taking off some of the, and what you can do is pretend like you're washing your hands, and a lot of it will come off. If you use a sort of a teaspoon of flour on your hands, that will work too, but you'll see as you roll it, most of it comes off your fingers. So now guys, when I explain kneading, and when a lot of people explain kneading, they want you to follow a certain technique, and that's just not, it's not necessary. I just knead however I feel like it, but I do say to people that if you're not out of breath, then you're not kneading properly. Can you see it was so sticky, but it really, it won't, and I haven't added any flour to this because I don't want to change the consistency of my recipe. So now there's lots of ways of kneading. A lot of people do this and they pull the dough and they put it back on itself, and then they pull the dough. Some people do this and they push it over and push it over, and then they turn it and push it over and over, and I do that just because I like it. But there is no set way of kneading. This is also one of my favorites ways of kneading, and in that I'm taking my fingers and I'm pulling the dough from the top. Let me just move that, oops, move that camera out. So I'm pulling the dough from the top, going over, and then I use the palm of my hand to squish it in, and then I keep going around, and I do it with both hands. So I'm just moving the dough around, and the whole object of kneading is to develop those gluten strands. So if I show you now, all right, we've got some nice elastic dough. It's nice and soft and it's stretchy, but it's still got quite a lot of rough spots. All right, and I'm going to knead that for about 4 or 5 minutes. And again, this depends on your dough, depends on your flour, it depends on how much liquid you've put in, but you want a nice smooth dough. So I'm going to carry on and I'll show you what it should look like. Right guys, so I've been kneading for about 3 or 4 minutes, and my dough is nice and soft and pliable, and when I pull it out, it doesn't break too easily. And you really should do the window pane test on the next one. But if you see, if I thin it out and thin it out, it doesn't tear very easily. So that shows you that you're ready. Okay, you've got that elastic bit. All right, and I can almost see my finger through it. If I pulled a little bit more, obviously it's going to break if you pull too much, but I've got that nice elastic. And again, it will happen again once it's been proved. So now I call it putting my dough to bed. So I just tuck in until I got a nice smooth dough, and then I get my bowl back that I used, and I take some oil, and I'm just going to pour a little bit in there. That's just a tablespoon of oil, that one. I'm going to line the inside of my bowl, and then I'm going to put my dough in there, and then I'm going to take some oil again, and I'm just going to put some around the outside. Right, and then I'm going to I've got some pots ready here, and this is why I say I put it to bed, because I'm going to wrap it in a tea towel, and then I like to wrap mine in a towel as well, but that's purely because my kitchen's very cold. And then I'm going to leave that for about an hour and a half to double in size, and I'll come back and show you what it looks like. Right, so that has been proving for just over an hour and 10 minutes, and it's doubled in size. But what I wanted to tell you was, guys, do not do what I did. I forgot to add the egg to my dough. So I then had to take it out of the bowl, put the egg in, and it was a really messy process. So please don't do that. Remember your egg. Now, to tell if your dough has proved enough, just stick a finger in it, and if it doesn't pop back up again, then your dough is ready. So now we're just going to, this is called knocking it back. So we're just going to knock out some of the air. And you can see the air bubble there. Can you see that? Oh, it's popped. All right, and I can hear it, and your dough is a completely different consistency now than what it was. Now, I followed the recipe except for the peel, because I don't have any. I used those for the ones that failed yesterday, but I'm adding a little bit of a little chocolate kick to mine. So I've got some chocolate buttons, and I'm adding the apple. So now what we're going to do is we're going to bring the dough into the center, and we're going to leave it in the bowl because we're going to let it prove again. But what we do want to do is we want to make sure that all the fruit is evenly distributed. So give it a good push as you're going around. And I'm going to do that and then come back. Right, so I've done that, and what I'm going to do is pop some more oil over the top. And guys, you want to do this so that the dough doesn't form a crust on the outside. Right, and then I didn't show you this before, but this is actually what I do. I have some cling film that I just pop over loosely. I don't make it tight over the bowl or anything. I just tuck that in, and that's an extra layer so that it doesn't go crispy on the top. And now again, I'm going to leave that for another hour, hour and a half, depending on how warm your kitchen is. Warmer your kitchen, the quicker this will happen. Cooler your kitchen, the longer it's going to be. And I'm going to put it to bed exactly the same way, cover it, and pop it in a warm place. Right guys, so now you can see how much that's risen this time. The second proof. I'm going to keep that plastic because I'm going to cover my trays in it. And now you can see how springy and beautiful that dough is. It really is gorgeous. So now we're going to shape, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Now with the shaping of the dough, I don't do this, but I'm going to show you how you can do it if you want to. So the dough, it's always better to have the dough the same size, so the buns the same size, because not only do they bake evenly, it also looks better. So I've just knocked that back just a little. I haven't knocked all the air out of it, and I'm going to grab some dough, break it, and the recipe says about 75 grams per bun. So I've got a scale next to me, and I'm just going to, right, so it's about 80. Right, so there we go. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to tuck everything under. Now, especially if you've got fruit or chocolate chips in your dough, try and get some dough to cover everything, because if you don't, the chocolate or the raisins or anything that's on the top will actually burn, and that can cause your buns to be bitter, or that part of your bun to be bitter. Right, so I just squish it closed at the bottom. Don't worry about the apple. Right, and I'm just going to make them a nice round shape. I use my thumb. Right, and you can also roll it around in your hand like that. Right, and then I'm going to pop these on trays. Now I have got a tray ready here, and I've got some parchment paper on it, but you can simply use a tray with just flour on it. That's absolutely fine. and the recipe says it makes 15. So, and I'm going to space them out, guys, because these are going to rise again, so I'm going to space them out with at least a couple of centimeters in between. So I'm going to go ahead and do all those shaping just by eye, and then I will show you before they go. I'll show you before the next step. Alright, so that's taking me way too long to just break off pieces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I normally do it. And that is, I've made a big sausage out of my dough. And I've got, but you can use a knife, alright, you can use anything. And I'm going to cut off a piece that I think is about 75. Throw that on. Needs a little bit more. And that is how I'm going to do it. And I've got a little bit of flour on my hands because the dough does end up being quite sticky, especially with the apple. All right, and that's how I'm going to shape them. Just shape them with my fingers like that, squish them with my thumb here, make them into a nice round, and then they go on the tray. All right, sorry guys, I had to come pick up my boys from school. So I've done two here. I've done one in sort of a round shape, and these have been proving for about 20 minutes already. And then I did another tray because it's 15, and then I did another tray in sort of a rectangular or square shape, 9 and 9, and you can see that they are proving quite nicely. My kitchen's actually warmed up a lot this evening because I've had some sunshine coming in all day, as you can see. I'm going to prove those for a little less time, and then they're going to go into the oven, and I'm going to show you that later. Right, so those are almost ready to go. So the last thing that I have to do is make the cross for the top, and that just involves some flour, again some bread flour, and I'm going to put about a tablespoon of water. We don't want it too thin because we have to pipe this over the buns. Another tablespoon. And if we make them too thin, it's just going to slide off, making a mess here. Alright, I think we're going to need another tablespoon. Alright, almost there. Right, I'm going to mix that. I think I've got enough water in there now, and I'm going to mix that and I'll show you what it looks like. Right, there we go. Given that a really good mix. And now I'm going to pop it into a piping bag, and then I'll show you how to pipe it onto the buns. Right, so that's ready. And I'm just going to get the cling film off the buns. And I'm going to snip not a big hole, just a little one off the end. Now I'm going to do a little bit of a cheat on the crosses, and I'm going to go from that side because it is actually quite difficult to get this neat, the ends neat. So I'm going to go from that side as well. And then I'm going to do the same on the other tray. And then guys, they're going to go into the oven for about 20 minutes at 220 degrees C. and we bake at very high temperatures because we want to kill the yeast. We don't want the yeast to be active again afterwards. And I'll show you what they look like when they come out of the oven. Right guys, I wish you could smell these. Look how beautiful they are. And to make sure that they're done, you need to sort of lift one. Be careful because they'll be hot. And you can see how beautifully they are. And tap them, and if they sound hollow, they are done. Those look absolutely delicious. Right, so the last step before you can serve them is some jam. You can use any jam that you want. I've just popped this into the microwave for 10 seconds just to heat it up so it's easier to spread. And unfortunately my oven is very uneven. It is hotter at the back of the oven than it is in the front, so I normally turn them around, but I didn't catch those just in time. But luckily my husband likes them a bit darker, so it's not a total waste. But what we want to do is we want to get this lovely glossy look to, and sticky look to our hot cross buns. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover them in the apricot jam, or whatever jam. I've used marmalade before, depending on the filling, but I have to say that apricot jam is my absolute favorite. Right, and you can see now, once you've done that, how beautiful they look. And then I'm going to let them cool down just a little before I shove one in my mouth. It's going to be delicious. So guys, have fun. Please have a go. They are so much fun to make, and let me know how you go.